Welcome to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Cate. He is the Executive Director of the California State Association of Counties. We're coming to you from the Sacramento Bureau of the California Channel, and I'd like to speak with you, sir, about the drought, which is just devastating on so many levels. And I want to talk to you about the county perspective. The big issue that's percolating, if I may say, in counties is the question about groundwater. What's happening with the groundwater under the 58 counties? What do we know today in terms of regulation of groundwater in our state?
Well, we don't regulate much of the groundwater below California. Unlike other states, it has been largely unregulated for most of our history.
And that's really an understatement. As I understand it, about 49 states regulate groundwater, and we are the only state. Now, in the past, that may not have been a problem, but as I understand what's happening, right now you have folks that are really in a panic, which we understand, and they're just drilling deeper and deeper and deeper. And in some communities, especially in the Central Valley, we're getting what we call subsidence. So the ground is kind of collapsing on itself.
That's right. There's been some amazing images of whole small dams starting to sink. Wow. You know, it's been really something else. And the drought is hitting those Central Valley communities hard anyway. Mm-hmm. And now to put on top of it this issue of, are we going to run out of groundwater? Are some of these farms going to go out of business?
Right.
It's a really tough time.
So there is a move within the legislature to regulate groundwater. On the most basic level, how do counties feel about the regulation of groundwater basins? I know counties aren't monolithic, but has CSAC taken a position or looked into this?
Yeah, so on the whole, we recognize we need to regulate groundwater in some way. The counties, as always, you know, we live and die by the idea of local control.
Sure.
Local communities should have a big say in how their resources are regulated. And so I think we're open to the idea, but we're going to continue to push for making sure that each county has a big say in how that's done.
And I believe that the legislation that is really on the top of the agenda, I believe supported by Senator Pavley and Assemblyman Dickinson, would give the local counties the control they desire. If the counties don't exercise that control, then the state would step in. Is that where we're at right now?
Well, they do give the local areas the ability to self-regulate, and the question is going to be, how does that happen, right? Is it going to be through a JPA, a Joint Powers Authority, or through a water district working in partnership with the county? There's a lot yet to be decided, and so we're going to have to stay tuned to figure out how this is going to work.
At the same time, we know that certain groundwater basins are polluted. I think about some of the groundwater basins in the Los Angeles area as a result of some of the military industry that had been very active in the 50s and 60s. Where do we go on that front? Is that something that really needs to be addressed through some type of capital spending project, a bond, whatever it may be?
Well, when you're talking about the Los Angeles area in particular, you're talking about the eighth largest economy in the world,
of course, yes.
Whatever. Uh-huh. And so the state has to be involved in terms of funding the big projects.
Right.
And so we're continuing, whether it's, we've talked before about public safety, we want the state involved on that issue. Here, whether it comes to, we need the state involved in above ground storage.
Right.
We need the state involved in providing for groundwater cleanup, and we need the state involved on the levees issues too. So
when we come back, I want to continue our conversation, but talk more about what's happening on the prison side. I know that you're actively involved in those discussions. For our viewers on HLN, I want to thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we're going to be right back speaking with Cate of CSAC. So, sir, let's talk about the situation with prisons in our great state. As you know, better than probably anyone, given that you ran prisons for the state before you joined CSAC, we are through a process now that's called prison realignment, whereby lower level prisoners are being sent rather to state prisons, county jails. There's been a challenge, though. As I understand it, we see offenders staying for much longer. In one case in Los Angeles County, I understand, there's a 42-year sentence. that doesn't seem like a lower level offender to me if they're serving 42 years. Explain that scenario if you may.
Sure. Well, when the concept of realignment first came up, we did talk in terms of, well, how many years should you be able to do in a county jail? 3 years, 5 years? Ultimately, that was rejected in place of a sentencing scheme that was based on the charging and the conviction itself. And so what you see are drug offenders and property crime offenders, these, typically nonviolent, who, they have a lot of different small level crimes that add up really quick. And as you point out, those long sentences are absolutely killing the county jails, and we've got to do something about that.
They're just not equipped. They don't have the resources. They don't have the infrastructure to keep these prisoners for that length of time. It would have seemed to me that the solution should be simple. Simply, if you have a sentence beyond the 3 years, it should go to state. Or do some type of swap, where if someone's coming to the end of the sentence, you can then bring them to the county. For the longer level offenders, you send them up to the state. But someone told me recently it's a little trickier because protections that may be in place in a county jail would then transfer to the state, and vice versa. State protections would transfer to the county. So it gets more complicated. Is that fair?
Well, it's the second scenario that's the biggest problem. When the state sends an inmate to county jail, the federal court orders that have been in place about that inmate follow him or her to that jail, and now the sheriff is bound by all the same stacks of regulation and court orders that used to drive me crazy.
Right.
And so the sheriffs are like, hey, I don't think we want that trouble. You can keep yours, we'll keep ours, but let's at least put a cap on that so that for those guys that are doing 5, 7, 10 years, those guys we'll contract to send those to the state.
Right.
But we can't get those guys back, unfortunately, because of the courts.
Really? So do you anticipate, well, okay, that's fair, but I can't imagine that the state's going to want to willingly accept these prisoners when they are coming up against a federal court order, I think, is it February 2016, that's setting a ceiling for the number of prisoners. So if the state's taking more prisoners but not sending more down, it seems like it's a real mess.
That's exactly the problem. Well stated.
Right.
And what do you do about it? Well, you can send more inmates out of state. Those are jobs that could be in California. You can build more prisons. Very expensive proposition. And the other option is some kind of sentencing reform, right? Addressing who is in and who is out. But we think that you definitely should build some more jails for these offenders. And the number of guys doing really long terms, I think, is de minimis. So you get you can get to a couple hundred that are doing those terms, kind of over 10 years. I think we start there, and then figure out the problem as we go.
You mentioned the construction of new prisons. During the 90s, even in the last decade, there was this whole notion we need to spend more on schools than we do on prisons, and that's a fair juxtaposition. But we haven't built prisons for a very long time. And our population continues to grow. And so we're now at a state where we probably do need to start thinking about building more prisons. But is there the motivation, the incentive, the desire to expend those funds?
I don't think so. And at a minimum, we should replace some of the decrepit prisons that we're currently using. There's a prison in Norco, California, called the California Rehabilitation Center. It was really a Navy base.
I know that, yeah.
Terrible conditions to try to run a prison in. But again, it's $500 million to build it. It's $150 million a year to run it. And I don't think the legislature has the appetite for it right now.
So where do we go from here?
Well, the governor's going to need to, I think, show leadership in the area. I think he has a willingness to think about replacing some of the older facilities. He has been a great partner of counties in terms of helping build county jails. And so I think, once we get through the fall, we'll take it on.
His name is Matt Cate. He is with CSEC. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's California Edition.